Hi, I'm Mckell Keeney. We're here in Tempe at the Pyle Center with John Autore, who grew up in Tempe, went to high school in Tempe. We also have Bill Loffridge here and Dwayne Rowan in the audience. It is February 17th, 2022, and we're excited to hear from you tonight and hear some of your family stories, John. Let's start with where you were before you came to Tempe, or were you born in Tempe? How did your family end up in Tempe?
No, my parents are both from Marquette, Michigan, and they both moved down to Minneapolis for the war effort after they graduated. And so I was born in Minneapolis in 1951, and then he worked for the Ford Motor Company assembly plant on the river above the Mississippi River on the bluffs. And we moved down here in 1959, so that in 1959 they started the ASU engineering department. I think George Beakley was the president of the college at that time, and then grew and grew. And the first couple of years, there was only that building A at engineering building. All the other buildings didn't come afterward. So you'd still park in the parking lot next to it. But then, because he was freshman, he taught.
You're talking about your father came
Yeah,
here to teach
he
ASU?
taught his first couple of years at an abandoned church on the street right between engineering building and the swimming pool.
All right, so that became
There was an old church, and the church was between the law building that hadn't been built and the women's gymnasium that hadn't been built.
All right, so you were around 8 years old then when you got here to Tempe, is that right? 1959?
So from 59 we were there, and then after I graduated from Mount Carmel School down the street and from ASU with degrees, I moved back east to various places.
After you're talking about when you were an adult now, when you moved back east? So let's back up to when you were a little boy. When you were first.
Oh, that was fun. It's kind of like it was kind of like McClintock was just one concrete in either way and ditches on both sides and dirt on fields on both sides. The mother got mad when you got your feet and your things dirty. So right on Rural Road where we were, there was, on the east side, there was a long irrigation ditch. It runs in front of it's buried now, but runs in front of the Mount Carmel Church School and Convent. And where the rectory was a cottonwood forest, and at the corner of Rural and Loma Vista was a cotton field. A cottonwood tree and forest, and we'd play in the forest and climb the trees, and then dig holes and cover them over, and that would be our fort underneath it. Then we'd play in the irrigation pool, the irrigation that ran down the street on the east side of Rural Road.
Who were some of your friends and neighbors there on Loma Vista?
It was kind of strange. It was kind of like they're all gone now and moved away. The one on next to us had a nice brand new Corvette Stingray car. It was red. Mm-hmm. He was, now I forget his name. His father was the president of Canal Homes.
All right. Did he have any kids?
And then behind us, the first house was my friend Eddie Canal, and his canal was associated with Canal. And then later, the one in the first house moved away, and the one that lives there now is Helmut Starkey. He and his wife came from Germany and survived the Nazi Holocaust, and they live here. His wife died, but he's around 99 now and still living in his house. The house flippers haven't gotten to his house yet.
All right, I've heard that name, Helmut Starkey. I'm sure Bill knows who that is. Who lived there at the house with you? Tell me about your siblings.
Okay, there were the first four of us with Blue Eyes was born in Minneapolis, in Bloomington, next to the Minnesota Twins Stadium, which is now the Mall of America, and next to the airport, and right next to Lake Nokomis. So we go swimming or ice skating on Lake Nokomis. And then So there's 4 of us in a nice, wonderful Tudor Victorian house, but now we have ordinary house here. And so we grew up, so the 4 of us came down to Arizona.
With your
And
parents?
then 3 more were born, and they were born at St. Joseph Hospital downtown.
In downtown Phoenix?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's like on Mckell or something. No, it's on Thomas. Thomas and 3rd Avenue, right next to Park Central.
Okay.
And then my grandfather at that time worked at the other hospital, which was Good Samaritan Hospital on the south side of Mckell around 13th Street.
And I think you told
And that
me...
was back in the old days, because you could go downtown and there'd be Woolworths and Sears and Newberry's and the Fox Theater. The other theater is still standing. It went Mexican, and now it's the famous theater downtown. Was it the Orpheum?
Uh-huh, I think so.
It got restored instead of
Talking
getting
about Phoenix?
destroyed like the Fox Theater got destroyed.
Right.
So that's where you went to go shopping.
Did
And
you-
when you went between downtown and Phoenix and Tempe, there were gaps. It was complete desert between there. Like if you went down Thomas Road, there was nothing there. All it was a tam o' shanter, and it was all nothingness between Scottsdale and Phoenix. Just as in the olden days, if you went from Mesa to Chandler, there was absolutely nothing. It was just all cornfields between there. It wasn't even paroled by police. It was paroled by highway patrol, and the highway patrol guy got mad one day that we were in the left-hand lane instead of the right lane for slow traffic, and pulled us over.
Do you remember any Tempe shops? Where did your mom get groceries, or where did you go
At the
for restaurants?
back before they just before the university overtook the whole town, there was Tempe Center. There's a little bit of it still remaining. There was a W.T. Grant's grocery store, then a bookstore.
What intersection?
And the shopping center was El Rancho in the corner.
Okay.
And then there was that barber shop. And then at the corner, I don't know what it was originally, but when it was popular, it was that Tower Records, which
Okay.
was always good
Yeah.
for records. It was still VCRs and that games and books, and it was a wonderful place to go shopping. And then the one closer to us, if you go down Rural Road, Rural and Broadway, none of those stores existed. It was like Super X and Safeway, and you had one had a curved roof. Oh, Lucky's and Super X. One had a curved roof, and one had a 3 curved roof on it. So that's where you went shopping, down at that corner. And then if you wanted to go shopping elsewhere, you go to the root beer stand on Apache Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
And then the original one my brother worked at was the original McDonald's that's on Apache that was near the new McDonald's on Rural.
All right, so you went to Mount Carmel for school, and then you went to McClintock for high school, is that right?
Yeah, because it was Mount Carmel, our friends were split. So some had to go to Tempe because they're on the west side of Rural Road, and some of us had to go to McClintock because we were on the east side of Rural Road. And our friends that came from north of the river near Curry Road and Papago Park, they were assigned to McClintock too for some reason. So apparently everything south belonged to the Buffaloes, and everything on our side belonged to McClintock.
All right, so your family represented
That was before they
both schools.
do the lot, before they built Marcos Deniza.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to school in 1965 and graduated in 1969 from McClintock. That was the first year, and I was the first freshman class there. There were 2 years ahead of me, 68 and 67, but they had to go to half days at Tempe High School, so it was like, I don't remember which way was which way, but it was like probably Tempe High is in the morning, and then all the students from McClintock spent the afternoon at Tempe High and in Tempe's High seats.
Right, you had split sessions.
But I don't
Yeah.
remember if it was Tempe and McClintock or McClintock and Tempe reversed.
Who were some of your friends there in high school? Your high school friends? Do you remember any of their names, or are you in touch with any of them?
No, I missed, because I was sick, I missed the 50th reunion we just had.
Okay.
But the big one from the, most of them, you don't keep in touch that much, but the two that became kind of famous that has her Facebook page is Marcy Rubacaba, and she kept winning beauty contests, and she ended up in the Miss Teenage, Miss America or something pageant. And then there was one that was he was a reporter called, I don't know if he still does it, but you'd see him on the papers. He was a bio with a he said, she said lady in the financial page on Saturday, and his name was Dale Doughton.
Okay. He was a classmate of yours? He was one of your classmates?
Yeah,
All right.
they're both from my same class.
Your same class. What about any of your teachers? Did you have a favorite teacher in middle school or?
No, kind of like
high
each was
school?
very different and nice. We were stuck having to learn a language, unfortunately. So the most logical one was Latin, because at least Latin made you help understand English better. So he was called Schultz or something, his last name. And he was from Germany. And so, because we didn't like Latin that well, we tried to distract him and try to find out more about Germany, and does he think in German or does he think in English? And try to distract him. We had better luck distracting the chemistry teacher, because he could wander off on other subjects.
What extracurricular things did you do? Did you start in theater in
You
high
didn't
school?
really have time to do
No?
extracurricular activities because you didn't really know about much, but you knew you had to get an education, because that was when the Indochina War was happening and Vietnam, and then you have to graduate and get all your grades. Otherwise, and so you go to college, otherwise you'd be drafted and end up dead and home in a body bag.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first year, the draft, I wasn't eligible, and so my number was like 365. The year I was eligible, I was 007. And so I'd be dead now if I hadn't gone to ASU.
Did any of your siblings end up serving in the military?
No, because the second one, who was a year younger than me, Mike, injured his hand playing football, and it never got better. Apparently he was in the cast for too long.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was permanently 4F, and by the time Patrick, who was 3 years younger than me, came along, the war was over. So we were saved from the war. The only one that was in the military was David, because apparently at that time it's kind of like he got a degree in forestry and national parks, but apparently they weren't hiring at that age, so he went and joined the military. He was stationed all over in Merced, California, but then he got unlucky or lucky, depending on which approach you take. And so he was in the Air Force, and he was stationed at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska, which was cold as hell up there. He has home movies of, but he had his two kids, but apparently they didn't have a maternity hospital at Eielson Air Force Base. So his two kids were born at North Pole.
Really?
In Alaska.
Oh, okay.
So that's on their birth certificate. They're born at the North Pole.
That's
Andrew
fun.
and Katie.
All right. Those are your
That's not everybody can say that.
Your
Oh, I'm
nephew.
born at the North Pole.
your nephew and niece.
But he's retired now, and he used his GI Bill to get into nursing, and so he supervises all the nurses and medical things at high schools and grade schools, first in Merced County, where he was stationed, and now he's in Marina, California, next to the Fort Ord Air Force Base that died too, just like Williams.
All right, and let's go to ASU.
Okay.
How did you decide to go to ASU, and how did you decide what to major in?
Oh, well, Dad was in engineering, but I found out kind of like it wasn't any fun. I got the engineering degree, so I thought I'd design things and build things, but it didn't turn out that way. It was kind of like, I don't know if ASU is better than it was, but in those days they thought more of theory engineering rather than practical hands-on engineering. So I got the engineering degree, but wasn't having any fun. The fun I was having was because I went to the theater department for my extra credit, and I was having a hell of a lot of fun over at the theater department. So I went out and did displays for it's gone now, but all the diamond department stores, and you do store displays and everything. And Christmas, you built these big, it's in the book, but you'd build these kind of like gingerbread castles and 8-foot tall Raggedy Anns and Andy and decorate and have fun. But then that's when the oil embargo started and suddenly things went into a dip, and so no one was buying things in the store and they started reducing their staffs.
Did you also act, or was your specialty building the sets?
But what was fun was that you could go out and build sets or when I was a graduate, so I was having fun doing engineering, not having fun doing engineering, I was fun doing theater. And you'd build sets and you'd paint and do what you want. If you saw something you liked, you'd design it into the set so you could build it. And so we were at the Lyric Opera Theater and building things and having fun. And when I was in graduate school, my offices and my storage for props was at the Payne Training Building and Cosner Auditorium, where the music building's nearby. But the whole ASU Art Museum and the ASU Theater never existed. That was Cosner Auditorium and their theater that burned down. So everything was there, and we do all our work from there, and we do our shows at the Lyceum. So it was very fun and convenient. So I ended up getting because I built up so much extra courses doing the fun thing I wanted, I only needed 30 hours to get a bachelor's degree, BA in theater, and then I stayed around to design sets for them, and I got a master's in theater too. So it's kind of like fun. But in the old days, ASU was fun because there's fun things to do in town, and you take whatever courses you wanted to, so long as you take the required courses. But that's in the old days when we had more things. So I took a course in ice, because I'm from Minneapolis. I took the course in ice skating. You went down to Oceanside Ice Rink and spent an afternoon skating. And then when the pool was still across from engineering, I took a nighttime course, and we learned scuba diving in the ASU swimming pool that was next to the men's gym. And then what was really nice is, in the olden days, if you go on the main campus, there's a big pink building that's called agriculture. And they taught agriculture in that building. And so you could learn about agriculture, and one of the courses was equitation. So you'd have in the course, one day you were in learning about horses, but the next day you get to go ride the horses. So if you go to the university and go south, you go down on College Road, you go past Broadmoor, and then you go past McCamey School. And as soon as you pass McCamey, there was this big, huge ASU farm where you go and spend the afternoon riding horses, learning to ride horses. Later, it was kind of like they moved it out, and now it's they moved the farm out to what is now the Price Corridor and the ASU Research Park. And then I think after them, it disappeared, just like the University of Arizona cotton experimental farm across from Tri-City Mall disappeared. But at least that got to be something decent. It's now the high school Votech College high school, so it serves a purpose now. It just didn't disappear like the SU farm disappeared.
I think you told me that because your father taught at ASU that you all got to go on the cheap, as you put it. You benefited from.
Yeah, because it was kind of like he said he wanted to leave Ford because all roads lead to Detroit, and he didn't want to be in cold, frigid Detroit. And so he moved down here. But I think after you think about it, it's kind of like, it's probably, he came down for the educational benefit. He had 4 kids in Minneapolis, 3 kids in things. So he had 7 kids he had to put through college. So he got a discount because I saw, he keeps everything. I had found his 1963 tax returns. And it's kind of like, they didn't pay much in those days. Although in those days, gas was 33 cents a gallon, not like it is today. But so we had to go to school and pay our own tuition. So it was $43.50 for a semester. And if you're engineering, you could take up to 19 hours. And so that was it. For all 19 hours, it's $43.50 a semester. Later, the Board of Regents raised the price, and then I had to pay $87 a semester. So my education was cheaper than having to pay the books at the bookstore. And it really helped. And what was nice was, if you wanted to go to summer school or had less courses and later, you could just take, as long as you took only 6 hours a semester, it was $5 for 6 hours. So for $10, you could take 6 hours plus 6 hours during both semesters. And it was really cheap there. And the food was cheap too. McDonald's hamburgers were like 6 for $1.
Wow, okay.
And so those were the cheap days, and gas was 33 cents. That's why I was annoyed when I went to California once. I just bought gas for 33 cents in Tempe before I left. And then halfway there, because it's 400 miles, you had to go to a Texas location and pay 45 cents a gallon for gas.
Tell us what you know about the TB Sanitarium. Where was that?
Well, it was always a CB Sanitarium till ASU bought that too, and it's like a 3-story building, and it's kind of like, so during Christmas time, the nuns would have us go in the evenings and sing Christmas carols to the patients there, but you weren't allowed in because I assume that, I don't know for sure, but I assume that tuberculosis is contagious, and they only let us sing outside. So you'd walk, it's a kind of like a U-shaped building, so you'd walk around all the windows slowly, and then you'd sing Christmas carols along the way. And then when we were done, we'd all go to the convent, and convent on Rural Road had a carport, and then they'd have cookies and hot chocolate, which is kind of like heating milk and putting chocolate in it. It was kind of like, ugh, it's nasty.
Not your favorite.
But other than that, the rest of it was fun.
And this is up by Curry Road, is that where it is?
Yeah, if you go up Mill Avenue and turn right at Curry Road is, the bridges didn't exist in that way, especially when it was flooded. The only bridges, when we were there, the only bridges were the Mill Avenue Bridge and then the Central Avenue Bridge. But at one point, the Central Avenue Bridge broke, and it wasn't working. So if you wanted to go to Tempe, from Phoenix, everybody had to go over Curry Road to get to the Mill Avenue Bridge to get across the river, unless it was really flooded. Then they had trains that went over the train bridges carrying commuters. I think it was called Hattie's Train off there with Governor's Wife or something.
Was the sanitarium on the north side of Curry Road? Is that where it is?
It's just on the big hill.
Okay.
On Curry Road. It's a big 3-story, kind of like white cream brick building.
All right. I think maybe I know if it's still there. That's
it's
where
still
Project
there.
Humanities
Because
is with Dr. Dusters.
I needed to donate
project?
books to the Arizona ASU faculty's wise book sale, but they wouldn't pick them up. And so now if I want to deliver all 600 books, I have to go up there and deliver them to that facility.
Right,
Apparently it's completely ASU. And
I think it is. They have lots of departments. I was just in that building a few weeks ago, ironically, and that's kind of, we're talking about it because I had no idea that was the history of the building. Good to know.
There's one thing, I was in December to the Peterson farm, and we went there in the 60s back when it was the Peterson farm, and it's kind of like, you went there, it's kind of like, well, where's the farm equipment? Even when I went in there in December, where's the farm equipment? It's kind of like, is that really a farm?
They restored the house. Yeah.
At least that's house they didn't destroy. Everyone else in town they did, except I think it's the Moore building and the Hayden building, and then that one that's downtown called that used to be, I think it's on 6th Street. It used to be an Indian store, and now it's owned by the city. But they sell Indian artifacts on that, and now I think the city of Tempe took it over.
Now, you said your brother worked at McDonald's. Did you have a job in high school or college?
Yeah, it's kind of like between the connections was, I ended up during high school working I worked during the summer at ASU. During the summer, the first 2 years we'd clean out dorms where the messy students were and get ready for the fall. And so we'd have to do that. And then I knew people, so I ended up doing groundskeeping for the next 2 years. So I spent my summer doing groundskeeping there. And it's kind of like the salary they pay at ASU was $1 an hour. And then like the third year they raised it so you got $1.25 an hour during the summers.
Okay. Did your family, when you lived on Loma Vista, were you involved in scouting, I think you said? Did your family do Boy Scouts?
They were into, there's 7 of us, John, Mike, Pat, Paul, David, Ann, and then Greg. I guess they were open for another girl, but they got a guy. And so all the rest of them were in Boy Scouts, but I wasn't in Boy Scouts. It's kind of like we had just, and the real reason was I had just arrived in Phoenix from Minneapolis, and it was 3rd grade, and apparently joining the Scouts you needed to know your phone number, and we just got there. I didn't know my phone number, so I never bothered with the Scouts.
All right.
But the other ones were really into it, and so they did the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts, and then they went to jamborees out of state, and the kids would go to Philmont in New Mexico, and then when they got old enough, then they went there as staff members to Philbrook. And also when we were down there, because they were involved with scouting, we get to go swimming at South Mountain. Down at South Mountain, when you hit the bottom of South Mountain, it's around 20th Street against the mountain. There's something called the Herd Scout Pueblo. It's where they go camping or where they go swimming. And so you get to go swimming down there because the rest of the people belong to the Scouts.
Okay.
But what was the nicest, the one thing that, everything's being destroyed in this town. There were certain places that when your relatives and Dad's classmate came to town, there wasn't much to take anybody to. There was nothing there. The big thing was the Japanese garden. You had hundreds and thousands of acres on both sides of Baseline it was into the Tempe limits a little bit, but from there basically to 20th Street, when it changed to orange orchards. And it was kind of like, all time of year, it's kind of like all these stocks of flowers, and they're shipping them all over the world. And now it's gone. I don't think I saw a single flower stand the last time I went by there. There's like a raisin golf course and all crap there.
When you had relatives come to town then, that's one of the places you would take them, to the Japanese flower garden?
Yeah, there was only a limit the number of things you'd go. You'd go to the Japanese gardens.
Where else?
You'd take them up the hill and they'd drive up to the tower summit of South Mountain.
Okay.
And then you'd go sometimes go to the Biltmore and see the gardens there, and sometimes go to the Phoenix Library to look at the gardens down there.
Okay.
But there basically wasn't anywhere to go to at all unless it got late. If it got late, then you'd go see the movies. There was, in Papago Park, there was the Frontier, the Pioneer one, and if you went to Mesa, there was another one on Main Street.
Drive-in movies you're talking about?
Yeah, drive-in movie, so you'd always go to a drive-in movie. And then, but if it was during the day, you could go to the big theater, the big new theater called the Kiva.
Okay.
That's gone now too. It's torn down for that dumb
Tell me where that was.
Galleria Theater.
Is that in Tempe?
And they had a wide screen, and they showed how the West was won on this big, huge Cinerama screen. Films were big in those days, and you go watch the big, huge movie on the screen there.
Was that in Phoenix, the Kiva?
No, you just keep going up. If you go up Scottsdale Road and head toward Biltmore Fashion Park and the Safari Hotel on the right side, it was right there before you crossed over the canal.
Would you take out-of-town visitors to Rawhide? Did you go that far north in Scottsdale to the Old West?
Rawhide didn't
No,
exist.
did not
It was a
exist?
dream or something.
What about Legend City? Did you go
That
there?
was done. In fact, I have a tape there if you want to see it.
Okay.
Legend City was wonderful, but it didn't last very long. Legend City was between, in the olden days, the two streets came from downtown Phoenix. One was the hotels on Washington Street, one was the hotels on Van Buren. They both came to a point and curved down, and that became Mill Avenue. And so between Washington on the south and Van Buren on the top, and just the other side of the big, huge Salt River Project building was Legend City. So you had three things together to see. You had Legend City, and on the east of Legend City, which I think is 54th Street, you had the Wax Museum.
Right.
And then downtown, near the curve in downtown Fifth Avenue in Scottsdale, you had the second Wax Museum. And then on the east side, at night you'd take your winter visitors and you'd go to Salt River Project, and because it was a water business, they had all these dancing water shows in the front yard. Now I think it's either a building or a parking lot now. They kind of like mowed over all the dancing waters. Because that was the place you'd take them. There wasn't many places for anybody to go. And when they did come, they didn't come in the airport, they came by train. So in the olden days, the train would come through Phoenix, and you have it's a restaurant now, the Tempe Depot on Ash, and the Phoenix Depot was downtown in the bad section of Harrison. It's bad section now, Harrison on the Fifth Avenue or Sixth Avenue, and you go and meet your people who came on a train because they were from Minneapolis. They went from Minneapolis to Chicago and then took the train down here. Now these days you only get the train if you go through Flagstaff and Winslow or go down through Heel Bend and catch the train there. But everybody did by train in those days.
I think there was a story you had about going to see the cotton fields with visitors and ending up somewhere else.
Yeah.
When was that?
One time, our cousins lived in Iowa, and they'd been farming in the Iowa prairie and homesteading when they first had it. And so we have a priest that was at Loras College and taught students and nuns philosophy. He is Father William B. Collins, and all his relatives were from Ireland. So he came down here one summer to meet his grandpa, and grandma, Stafford, which was his cousins. Because Stafford married a Collins, and then they merged, and so we got the farm. And so he was from Iowa. His family was farmers. They'd seen cotton and knew about cotton. You know what cotton is. It's kind of like these ugly brown plants that have the little teeny puffs of white cotton on. So he wanted to find out what cotton was. So we went down, 3 kids in the back seat, and Father Will was driving, and Grandpa Stafford was on the left, and they were driving down, and they wanted to see cotton. So first we went to the Peterson house, which was it was mid-60s. By then I think it was owned by the fraternity, Masons or the Mormons or whatever, Masons or the Oddfellows. And like I said before, last month, there was no cotton fields there. There was no tractors there. There's no plows there. So we went on and continued down east on Southern. Southern Avenue used to be beautiful in the old days. It was a curving road and ditches on both sides, and these, like in Minneapolis, they had the trees covering the whole street. It was a beautiful shaded drive, but there was no cotton fields there. So we went south to the Japanese Gardens. It was gorgeous. We took a lot of pictures and movies there, and no cotton fields anywhere there. So we headed back, and my brother had friends on Priest Road. They had a pig farm, and the pig farm is just north of where Arizona Mills stands now. And so there's a pig farm, but he didn't remember where the cotton fields were either. So then we continued down on Priest Road, and Priest hits baseline, and then it curves and it goes straight. Well, catching back, it's kind of like in the olden days, baseline is baseline. It marks latitude and longitude. So the streets didn't come like this. It was kind of like rural road went here, then you'd go about a quarter mile, and the rural road continued there. And it was the same for every damn street all over the whole place. And so now these days the roads curve, but in the olden days you'd have to make a turn and then go back that way. So we went down there, we went down south, and so we went past Guadalupe on the right side of the street, and on the left side of the street past Guadalupe is Sanders Airport. And they have a big half-dome airport hangar, and that's where all the crop dusters go. So we thought we'd go ask them where a cotton field was. But it wasn't. But they were, on certain days they sell grapes because they had all the grapes vines around surrounding the airport. And so we went and picked grapes. It was 10 cents a pound. And then we went further south into more fields, and there was no cotton. By that time we were getting hungry, so we came back up on Priest Road or Rural Road or one of those streets. And we were getting pooped out at that time. And it's kind of like everybody's hot because air conditioning cars hadn't really been invented yet, unless it was kind of like those machines you added to the dashboard. So we were driving, and everybody was hot, and the kids were getting crabby. And so Father Will got disgusted. They thought they'd stop and ask for directions because they wanted to find out. They had no luck finding a cotton field. And he's a farmer, he wanted to find cotton. So we stopped at this dive bar. It was still there all I checked last week, and somebody tore it down, and now it's an empty parking lot and a Starbucks coffee shop. But if you go down, if you come up Kyrene Street from South Tempe, you'll dead end on Southern, and now there's a gas station. But before then, just to the east, west of it, is this dive bar, and it was called the Antlers Tavern. I think it may have been like the one in Apache. It was probably Stone or something. So he went into the Antlers town, and kind of like here we were. It's in the middle of nowhere. There was no gas station.
Yeah, probably had a car full of kids packed in.
Yeah, and so there was this thing, and it was, on 3 sides. It was in the parking lot in front, and 3 sides. All there was fields and fields of things. It wasn't alfalfa, because alfalfa stinks like crazy. So he went in and he came out with pop bottles of Pepsi for us. And he had the funniest look on his face, and he went looking around and going from side to side. And then he came in the car and gave us a pop and says, "We're in a cotton field."
This was your dad that said that?
The father will. He had finally, inside they had told him where the cotton field was. He says, "It's outside." So he had gone looking for cotton. It's brown with all the little things on it. Mm-hmm. But out in the field, it was out of season, so it was still green.
Oh, I see.
And all the yellow flowers. So all this time he has been seeing cotton, but didn't know it was cotton.
Right, as you were driving all over the place.
Yeah, looking for cotton. He knew what cotton looks like. It's brown.
Yeah, that's funny.
It was just out of season. And unfortunately, the bar is gone now. Kind of like crummy exchange for Starbucks.
Yeah. So you went away back to the Midwest for a while, and then you came back to Tempe. What brought you back to Tempe?
It was because I was trying to get it. I'd enjoyed having the theater jobs because I'd been at 6 different cities doing theater jobs. Mm-hmm. And I came back because they said they were doing a job for MCC. And also I had to interview for a job at DeAnzio College in Los Angeles.
All right.
Or north of Los Angeles.
Okay.
So I didn't get that job when I came back, but I had a job at a equity theater. It didn't last so long. It was called Actors Equity. Mm-hmm. It was just north of Perpetual Help on Miller, and so I worked several years for them. But then a friend told me that they're wanting to change over at ASU and get a new technical director. Because when I had time off, I'd go to ASU and work in Gamage Auditorium at public events. And so all these big name people would go to Gamage and you do their shows and take them down, put them up. One time, Frank Sinatra was playing in one of his big last gigs at the basketball stadium next to Sundale Football Stadium. Mm-hmm. And so we took that down, and I actually got his glass of water and brought it home with me to save it, wrapped it up. Hopefully his fingerprints were on it. But you'd buy all these things, and then when you're doing Gamage shows, it was kind of like important people were coming down. They're the nicest people you'd ever want. Buddy Epson is wonderful. You be out on the loading dock talking to him. It's friendly as hell. It's like your next door neighbor, and there's a lot of people there that way. So finally, by being the connection there at Gamage, I had heard about they're looking for a new people for the theater, for the music department across the street. And that's where in the early 60s, around 64, they founded in the music department Lyric Opera Theater, where they do 2 theaters shows and train theater people, and do 2 opera shows and train opera people. They changed the name recently, but since 64 it was Dr. Ken Sipes and did it. And so I became their technical director, and sometimes I do be their lighting designer too. But I was so busy I didn't have a chance to do any shows on stage till the last one. Last couple of shows, which was the Fledermaus, the opera, because I never had time to do anything. So I did it there, and then I finally kind of like Michael Kroll came through, and it's kind of like he made every dean take a test. It's kind of like, you need to prove why we should keep you as a department, why you should exist. Are you going to make money for us or not? And so it's kind of like, well, at that news, several departments that didn't count, like dance, music, and theater, weren't bringing in money other than ticket sales to fund their production expenses. And so I finally retired and left there and went over and joined the new theater, which was in downtown Gilbert. There's a new theater. They found it in Glendale, California. It's called the Hale Theater, owned by various family members. And so I went over there and designed and built their first 36 shows over there. But I was competing with my other job because Hale would do a show for like 6 weeks, and you spent some time building the show, but then you had off time too. So during the off time, I'd work over at the airport and work for America West. Then America West bought U.S. Airways out of the gutter and changed their name to U.S. Airways. Then they went and U.S. Airways then bought American Airlines out of bankruptcy and out of the gutter, and then renamed themselves American Airlines. So I worked 15 years for them at the same time I was working half-time with Hale Theater. And so that way you could go out of state and go shopping for Hale and go having fun at Disneyland and then come back. Because as long as you work for the airline, you go on the computer at any time of the week and book a seat on the plane. And if the seat was available and you were there, you could go anywhere you wanted to. So you travel all over the United States going shopping, which was really nice. Although it wasn't nice for your wallet, but it was really nice. And then you'd go up back home to Minneapolis because my grandparents were still in Minneapolis. My aunt was still in Minneapolis. And so you fly up there to go to a real state fair rather than going to the state fair down here. Because in Minneapolis, in St. Paul, they'd have a fair where it was huge. They'd have parades all over the place twice a day. And they had enough buildings that you'd have an animal for each building, and the animals would stay the whole run of the show. And there's like all these dealers. So there was a Ford dealer and a Massey Ferguson dealer, and they were all out, and so you look at all and drive all their tractors too. And then they'd have big name entertainment like Red Skelton and Patty Page come and do shows, and it's kind of like that.
Do you still have family back there, or where are your nieces and nephews? Do you have
that's what really
there?
came in handy being non-rev. Last year that my aunt was alive, I was her power of attorney and everything in there, and so I took 12 trips in that 15 months to go back there and take everything for her and take care of things. And then I kind of like came down here, and then mother got sick and died, and then dad got sick and died. In both cases, the doctors never figured out what was wrong with them. They just kind of like, at 89, both of them pooped out. So now I've got this house, 2 houses, trying to sort things in. But there's so many wonderful things that happen in Tempe, but there's so many things that are missing, like Legend City, and there's no, all the shopping malls I look for worked for Thomas Diamond's department stores are gone. Diamond's isn't at Fashion Square anymore, isn't at Park Central is gone, Tri-City Mall is gone, Metro Center apparently they said was just destroyed. And so it's kind of like all the department stores I used to work for are missing because everybody's interested in power centers now and not shopping centers. So I guess I made a good change to theater because store designers died. It's kind of like they'd rather sell the merchandise in the window rather than have a Christmas display and a fall display in their windows and on the top of their makeup counters.
You brought some things to show us. What did you bring? Are there things from your Italian side, your father's side, or
Well, it's kind of like I keep finding things, and I don't know where they came from.
Pictures.
Like this is a book. It shows New York and Niagara, and it doesn't have enough cars, so you can't tell what it is. But it's kind of like I still don't know what year it is. But there, on the back page and on this page, there's a guy that it says Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers, but that guy looks like General Pershing.
Does this belong to your mother or your father?
I don't know. It isn't labeled.
Is it from their house?
And mother didn't print, so maybe it's Aunt Jean went with her. Aunt Jean was born in 1928, so maybe it was from her. And here's one from the Steel Pier in Atlantic City.
Okay.
And
What else did you bring? Do you have any pictures of your house on Loma Vista?
yeah, I'm not there. But my aunt and every aunt was into into postcards, and I'm into
Postcards, okay.
postcards.
Yeah.
I'm still sorting them. The thing, it's amazing what all these hotels don't exist anymore. The Safari Hotel, the Adams Hotel was torn down and rebuilt, and ASU was torn down and rebuilt. There's something called Main Chance. Apparently it's for rich ladies that want to get their thing. That's torn down.
Heard of that. What?
And kind of like there's 2 wax museums,
Okay, yeah.
because there was 2 wax museums in town, and you know where Max, I think the only one that still exists is Madame Tussauds in Vegas, and so you'd go down to the wax museum and there'd be all these
Yeah.
people
I totally forgot about
doing
the wax
cutouts.
museum,
There's one
actually.
near Legend City, and there was one in the Curve
Yeah.
on the west side of things.
You said you had ASU postcards? In the
Yeah, there wasn't
books?
many in there. It's
Not many?
only,
Okay.
it's kind of like
Okay.
apparently they destroyed the history of Tempe before it existed. So you can't see, they had a swimming pool in Tempe Beach beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
They had a fire department and a city hall and a library downtown and thing. And then where Cosner Auditorium used to be, there used to be Tempe High School in its original location. They're all gone and missing. The teepees, Indian Teepee Hotel at Rural and Apache is gone. The Pineapple Bank with the big geodesic gold dome is gone, everything. But one thing I was telling you earlier about people that came from, tourists would come down. So the tourists would come down, they had 1944, 45 graduates, and so they would come down and visit with us. And during the winters, some of our relatives from Marquette that didn't like the snow would come down on vacation. And then we had, our next door neighbor was somebody that was from in Wisconsin, the Alexanders, and they lived in the pink house next to us, and they'd spend their summers down here, and down here they'd have a gorgeous car. It was like a 1956 pink and white DeSoto,
Right.
where all the big fins and the whole bit.
So they had
But-
a pink house and a pink car. They really liked
Yeah,
pink.
but the wonderful thing was, I found this last week when I was sorting things. This is from my Janet's estate. And so, the big thing that people wanted to do in the 50s, if you had relatives, they wanted to go Mexican shopping. And so in town, the only Mexican store was Chewy's next to the Scottsdale Performing Arts Center. That's why I was shopping at Chewy's one day, and Van Johnson walked by on the street. Apparently he was heading toward the Scottsdale Theater, or he may have come from, in the olden days, the guy from Hogan's Heroes used to work at an Equity movie theater, theater somewhere in downtown Scottsdale.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what his name is.
Bob Crane.
Bob Crane.
Bob Crane.
Yeah, Tom Crane.
Bob.
Crane
Bob.
was there, and apparently Van Johnson, at a different time when I saw him, apparently he was there to work at I don't remember the name of the theater now. It was an Equity theater.
Mm-hmm.
But the big thing, because there was no, Guadalupe had Mexican stuff, but not Mexican stuff. And so the big thing was that if you had tourists, you took them down to Nogales. And there was a hotel right on the border, and you'd park and spend the night, and then you'd go over in Nogales. And so this was from Nogales, because my 2 aunts, and it's been never used, it's still there.
Okay.
And so they would go shopping in Nogales, because
So they
and
look for
I'd buy it for
leather goods?
I'd buy it for the figures and go shopping there. They'd buy it for the leather and nice tourist turquoise jewelry and silver jewelry, and they like the little teeny thicker bottles. They're about that high. But this, I got this here because it reminded me of back in the olden days. As I said before, the railroad went through Tempe, and the railroad depot in Tempe was a railroad depot. It wasn't a stupid restaurant. And so the railroad went straight through, and you went from the mill and the Caden Mill and the railroad station on Ash, and then come through and go straight through the front of Sun Devil Stadium, which had just been built, and then it'd continue on to Mesa. And so that's where in 1976, the bicentennial was in Tempe. And so our relatives also came down to see the train, because the train had these wonderful, it wasn't an ordinary passenger train like the Hiawatha. It was an old steam train like in Marquette, like in Minneapolis, that had all the coastals from east west to west coast. In fact, Mother and Dad were some crazy reason, just like that hole in the ground up north, Grand Canyon. And so they'd always want to go camping at Grand Canyon. But the other thing was, near the Grand Canyon at Williams is the Grand Canyon Railroad. And they were really thrilled with that because two of the trains from Milwaukee from Marquette had followed them down. So the trains at Grand Canyon Railroad are actually Milwaukee trains from the iron industry. Mm-hmm. And so their favorite trains had fallen behind there.
So they actually had a bicentennial train then?
Yeah, and it had all the carriages, but it also had each custom box car had I think one had a Liberty Bell, and they had other things, and a train car, and they traveled between various cities and stayed for a weekend or a week. Okay. And so the bicentennial was there.
All right. Bill or Dwayne, do you have any questions for John about his memories of Tempe?
But one other quick thing, where in that guidebook you were talking about, in order to keep busy and have fun, I would go to volunteer and work and build their sets and design their sets at Tempe Little Theater. So right over across the street there is the Vial Center, and Tempe Little Theater's first shows were on a raised stage there, and I built sets for them. And after they did the sets there, they'd sometimes tour to the big retirement city in East Mesa resort travel parks and do their shows there. Then later, Tempe Little Theater moved down to the downtown theater on 6th Street, just this side of the light rail train station there. I think it's called, I was just at an APA meeting last week, and it's now given over to some kind of thing, a bubble development place called Fabrics, where costume people and everything goes. Yes, and then later Tempe Little Theater moved out to the lakes, where the Tempe Theater on the lakes next to the dam is there, and they have an art gallery. So I'd be working and doing shows as a volunteer for Tempe Little Theater. Well, at the same time, I had a couple of shows of my artwork at the gallery at the Tempe theaters.
What type
and
of
then
art?
Downtown, I had, at the Sky Harbor Airport, I had exhibits, and at the Step Galleries for ASU, I had art exhibits.
What was your art? Was it glass work?
Yeah, because in order to have fun, and I still got the faculty, now that I was staff, I got the staff discount too. And so I went over to the art department and started having fun over there. And there's like only 2 locations in the United States, and Jim White heads up Neon Glass working place. So you had it's in these books somewhere. It's like this cover here. This is one of the ones that was in the show, where this neon, there's several other pages. That's a Neon Glass. He was kind of annoyed with me, kind of like compared to the other students. These other students were art students, and he felt that you had to do art for a reason. It had to be a reason. It's kind of like, I'm just doing it for the fun of it. I don't care what beans.
Is this one of yours
Yeah,
on the cover?
and I had several more.
How big is it? How tall is that?
It's like 2 feet by 2 feet by
Okay.
18 inches tall.
Do you
That's
still
one of
have-
the smaller ones. There's other ones too in this. Well, there's sets in here and kind of like, I don't remember.
Do you know that a lot
But
of,
also, a lot of times in the early days, it used to be that, this is back in the olden days, diamond stores had they did scenery. So at Christmas, you'd have these oversized gingerbread, and as I said, well, Raggedy Ann and Randy, they were like 10 feet tall. And they made these from scratch, but they also bought some big teddy bears about.
so these are
6
some of
feet.
the displays you
Yeah.
help with?
And so all these different things, I don't know if there's one of them. But sometime, also in the olden days, before, before the Phoenix Light Parade was too big, we originally had a shorter route, and you'd go from Park Central, you'd meet up there, and then go down to about 2 miles, and then it would end. So, and I was in the first 5 or 6 of the things, and you had to light up. So I was taking what I had from Jim White's neon class and putting neon into a costume, so the neon would be the costumes would be lit by neon, and the big huge space guns were lit by neon. But then it got too big, and you kind of they wanted you to have your own walker ahead of you with your sign. So then I traded, and I went over to started doing the Christmas lights show in Chandler, where it had a shorter route that kind of went more into a circle. So it made it easier rather than, once they increased Tempe to Phoenix to 4 miles, it's kind of well, that's an awful long time. And with the buses stopped, it was hard to get from 4 miles down to 4 miles up after it was over.
All right. Well, I want to make sure that we get all our questions answered. Bill, what questions do you have for John?
Well, John, you've touched on a lot of topics, I think. I'm gonna go back to your high school days, and did you know Karen Anderson in high school? The Anderson family, Karen Anderson, she graduated with you. She's my sister-in-law.
I don't know, there's so many you hear and then you don't hear, and you go away and you don't. I think
Karen
some of
Anderson.
them. There's one, my friend from grade school, Mount Carmel,
Yeah.
is called Biff Januzzi, and he still lives in town, but apparently he was a radio announcer or something for somebody,
Sure.
and still does that. Although he's more of a photographer now, and his website has pictures of birds.
Well, because in your neighborhood where you lived with your parents, that was Canal's first development, commercial development in Tempe. That where the Canals lived and you lived, that was their first development. One of your neighbors was a guy named David Duran. You remember him?
David
No,
Duran?
the one I remember most was, there was another university professor, Campbell, I think it was, that lived a few more doors down from there.
Rudy Campbell.
Rudy Campbell?
Oh, that's what I was gonna say. I don't remember the year, but when I was doing my adventures, I haven't checked on their website, I meant to, but Rudy Campbell was mayor of Tempe. But he did side gigs, and so he was an actor too.
Was he? Okay.
So when I graduated from McClintock in '59, and
69?
69, and Boyle Auditorium didn't exist. It was an empty dirt lot.
Bill Boyle existed.
And so Doyle Auditorium was built later. So once it was built, they needed shows. So Rudy Campbell worked for ASU. He had his offices across between the MU and that big power plant behind it. And that was his offices. And he was involved with Tempe Musical Theater. And so they decided to do Hello Dolly. So I designed the sets and built it. and ended up stage managing it because they didn't have anybody to call the show. So I forget what year, I still have the poster, I found it about 4 weeks ago. It's a big yellow poster, and Rudy Campbell was Horace Vanderbilt, I think it was.
Was this community theater then?
Yeah, that was community theater. That's when they had more community theater. So there was Tempe Little Theater and Tempe Musical Theater. Then there was Mesa Little Theater, who renamed themselves Mesa Encore Theater, but there was also a Mesa Musical Theater. So I did Kiss Me Kate on stage and set two, and we did our shows at Westwood Auditorium.
Right. Well, John, I think that the Tempe Historical Museum would like, if you need someplace to put some of that stuff, the Tempe Historical Museum would love to have that sort of thing.
Well, that's one thing. Let me get my plug in here while I think of it. If you ever, I saw your Legend City exhibit. It wasn't until after it was over with that I found that tape there that shows about, we have like 200 reels of 8mm film and only 2 rolls that went to VCR. That one has at Legend City. Because there's, all the places I've talked about, it's kind of like, there was pictures of Grandma and Grandpa and the train arriving and going to the Japanese gardens and everywhere. But it's all there. But I thought, you know, and then I went to the Peterson house and had kind of like a mishmash of 50s and thing. It's kind of like, I have a piano that's older than their piano. I have an organ that's older than their piano. I have silver, like that silver, yeah. This silver goblet here is older than the Peterson house. It's from Wheeling, West Virginia, and I think I read it earlier, 1882. For a Victorian house, this is what Victorian people had, and I have like 300 pieces of this type of stuff.
Wow. Because
Grandma was into silver, and when I went to all the auction houses, the auction estate sales of the dead Tulsa oilmen, if I saw something, because I liked the craftsmanship of this stuff. In fact, in one in Tulsa, it's kind of like, I have this thing of an old tray. It's not really old, but it's old looking. It's not old looking. And it says, I got it because it was engraved. It was kind of like, they gave it to the president of the colored high school or grade school. And that was so unusual because in Tulsa at that time it was segregated. Whites could only live north of Tulsa, on the north side of the railroad tracks. And so you just heard a couple months ago of that big race riot where they killed all the people in Tulsa. They were black. And it's from that area. And this is kind of like, I was just playing nothing at the Peterson house. And this is another time. This is an old, okay, so one horse open sleigh, but the sleigh wasn't, the bells were on they had bells for sleighs, but these are bells that actually, that weren't on the sleigh, they were on the horse's collar. I have the horse's collar somewhere, but if you took the 2 wound knobbies off the top of a plow horse collar, then you'd stick them, there would be 2 bolts sticking out, and you'd stick this on the top of the collar, and then you'd close it down and put the knobbies back on it again. And so the horse would be what made the noise, although sometimes the sleigh makes the noise too. And it's the same like in the Peterson house, they wore shoes like this. It's kind of like, so they must have really had small feet in those days because my grandmother was only like 5'4".
Are those your grandmother's?
No, these are just, Lyric Opera Theater gets donations from all over everywhere where you can use them or not, but they bought a lot of parts from an old costume shop that went belly up. So I think this is from their old stock. And it's kind of like they're selling them off because no one has feet that look like that anymore, not even children's. But then when you go out shopping, you get stuff that you go back home and you find skis and sleds and the whole bit. So when I went back home to go shopping, because I went back to a state fair, and you go buy things like this. And these aren't American. These are what they would have at the Peterson house if the Peterson house was in Flagstaff. And so one of these says size 21 and one says size 28, which means they're not American shoes. That's a European shoe number. And it's kind of like you find all these wonderful things at these estate sales. And so if the horse had a bells, they more like have something big like this or something big like that they do on their ankles so you can hear it as they go, as versus the ones that were on the horse collar. And also when you go to these medical stores, it's kind of like, I have a whole thing because Grandma's family owned the mortuary. And so I had things, and I have a whole group of things like this. And it's kind of like, plastic wasn't invented in those days. He was founded his mortuary business in 1894. And so this is what, before plastic was invented, this is what they stuck in your body. And it holds up to 10 milligrams or something like that. It's marked here on the side, 1 to 10. And this is what they put into your body with a big needle. And it's amazing how things have changed in 100 years. And I've taken stuff I found, family stuff I found to Antiques Roadshows, and now they have their computers and can just go on the computer and say, oh, that's a French chair. But before, it's kind of like they didn't know anything, because the piano I have is from, it was made in England from George III. When he was still king, it was 1806. And so I have friends that I found out on the Friends of Square Pianos. And they matched my piano up with the pianos they know existed. And they said, well, your piano had to have been made made around 1806.
Was that your family's piano?
No, I got it at a sale.
Okay.
Cheap. I felt sorry for it. It was on a pallet, and they wanted $250 for it. But they kind of like, when I offered to buy it, it says kind of like, oh, well, give me for $125. And this was a piano that was built in England when Jefferson was president still. And it's kind of like but my organ is newer. It's like 1890s. I think it was like when Roosevelt or somebody was doing.
You have anything else you want to
So it's kind of like you have all these stuff, and it's kind of like, how many people have stuff in their closet? It seems like my plug now is kind of like, well, you should have a exhibit. I don't know. It would have been nice to have it for last year, but have an exhibit of kind of like, what do we have in our closets that other Tempies might have in their closets too? So it seems like you'd get better donations than your will when you die, and meanwhile you'd have interesting things that no one can see and know that. I wouldn't want to try to skate on these now. I'm an ice skater, and I wouldn't trust those to skate in now. But it's kind of like other people, like this is probably, the Petersons were from Europe. These are European skis. It's kind of like people would want to know things like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
with
but they never have a chance to see it because Tempe has limited things they can gather from other people. But it seems like if you could have a exhibit of what do you have in your closet, that way you can find out what they have in their closet and say, well, would you like to will it to us when you die?
All right, we'll make a plug for that.
Because that's the thing I'm wondering now. It's kind of like, I have a will, but my other 6 brothers, they have their own interests. They're in scoutings and kids and everything else. It's kind of like, they could care less about what I have. They don't even know what I have because it's still in storage at the other house. So it seems like you need to find out more of what you have.